May 27th is the presentation of the implementation action plan to the joint committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We appreciate that overview. It was very, very quick. There's a lot more detail in all of the documents. It's hard to distill 6 months of work into a 10-minute presentation. But a good overview, and we will give you a chance after Ezra speaks to ask some clarifying questions if you have some issues there. And just let me lay out kind of the format for you today, what we're doing. You had the presentation from Lynn. Ezra is going to give you the report, the executive director's report, and the staff recommendation. We'll give you an opportunity for about 15 minutes to ask clarifying questions. No comments, just clarifying questions. And then there will be 2 presentations on the 2 options that are before us today, option 7 and option 4. Those will be presented, and again, we will have a chance to ask clarifying questions. And then we're going to break into probably 4 groups around the room to have smaller discussions. And then appoint a representative from each of those groups to come back to the main group and discuss and talk about what your discussions were. It's either that or I can have 100 people get up and give a comment for 1 minute and we won't really have a discussion. The real opportunity for discussions is if we break up into smaller groups randomly and then let everyone have more time to discuss. So that's the format for this afternoon. And the next sorry Pat, not now.
I do want to talk about the format though. I think that we need to have some discussion about the format.
There will be opportunity after we come back from the breakout groups to have discussion. But this is what we're going to do. You're going to make your presentation at the appropriate time. But the next thing is to hear from the executive director, and Ezra has the staff report and recommendation.
First of all, how many people want to do breakout groups? Everybody, if you want to do breakout groups, fine, but I am in the discussions with Brad Paul, and I was under the assumption that the breakout groups would not occur. Because frankly, this group is big enough where we can have a discussion about the different options. And so I am not understanding what the purpose of the breakout groups are.
Pat, I'm not going to have a debate with you. Pat, I'm not going to have a debate with you. We are trying to accommodate everyone's opportunity to speak, and the best way to have a discussion is to break into smaller groups. Otherwise, I can line people up and everybody else.
I want to hear what everybody has to say.
Yes. How are we supposed to hear if we don't, we're not all
All right, we'll let everybody speak for 1 minute. That'll take probably 90 minutes, and I don't know that that's a discussion. So, but that's an issue, so.
There's not 90 people here that want to speak necessarily, so we don't really know how many, Julie. When I was understanding of the process, and I don't mean to be disrespectful here.
You are being.
Is that I was told, as of this morning, that we were going to have a presentation by management partners, and that Ezra was going to talk, and then we're going to have clarifying questions. And then there was going to be a presentation of option 7 by Supervisor Luce. And then this morning, I was asked to do a presentation on option 4 and what some of the concerns are about option 7. And that was going to be moderated by Supervisor Rabin. And
That's exactly the schedule I have in front of me.
no, except you have breakout groups. And so after the clarifying questions, then people were allowed to do comments after.
Pat, fine, we'll do it that way. I'm not going to stand here and argue with you. That's counterproductive, but right now, we're going to have a
Point of order.
Yes.
I mean, shouldn't we either take a vote on it, or should we do what the chair wants to do? I mean, it
Let's
seems,
vote.
it doesn't seem appropriate just to give it to Pat, because she's yelling on it.
I'm not yelling at
You are.
All right. I
don't have
will
the
ask
added
for a
advantage
show
of
of
the
hands, how many want a general discussion? How many would like to have breakout groups so they can actually be heard? Okay, we'll have a general discussion, that's fine. That's fine, we'll get through the afternoon somehow. The next thing on the agenda, however, is the executive director's report, and I would appreciate the respect of giving him your full attention.
Is it working? Yes. Okay, thank you first for coming and participating in this. It's a very important decision for ABAG. I'm going to try to summarize our analysis in a fashion that isn't very complicated. I think ultimately the solution to this, which will occur in our view in phases, is a lot more complicated, but to get to that idea about the path forward may not be. The reason why that is that Resolution 4210, which MTC passed, eliminates our land use governance from ABAG and shifts it to the MTC Commission, and it transfers a number of our planners to MTC. So it eliminates the planning grant that MTC provides ABAG. And ABAG lives primarily off that planning grant. We have for all these years in existence. ABAG really cannot continue functioning without the planning grant. We'll hit insolvency at some point relatively soon, and in the course of that, whoever worked for ABAG's pension will be severely diminished, as will the health benefits of retirees. So there are really severe consequences for the employees, but most importantly, we think there's severe consequences for the region. So therefore, 4210, in our view, is the worst case scenario. The reason why ABAG ended up having to endorse 4210 is that at the verge of the vote, MTC was to execute that resolution. We were able to negotiate 6 additional months for discussion and the retention of a neutral consultant to analyze the situation and hopefully within that time avoid that consequence. So that was what we did, and I think we do have a fairly reasonable proposal to make that we think the MTC Commission will adopt and therefore avoid 4210 and move us down the path to a different alternative. But first I just want to summarize quickly how we got there. Up on the slide is a diagram of a typical regional governance. Cities and counties come together and they decide that there are regional issues that they can't solve individually, and they create a body, and that body is called the Council of Government. Ours was one of the first ones created, and it has accomplished over its history, 50 plus years, many terrific things. And some of them don't say this is an ABAG inspired proposal, but everything from the protection of the bay, to air quality, to environmental, parks, to the parks, open space, etc., to mutual understanding about how our individual planning adds up. All of those things were on the agenda for ABAG, and a lot of really good work was accomplished. So you start with that governing body of cities and counties, and then within that is a metropolitan planning organization that is now the recipient of state and federal transportation dollars. And usually these are committees that are formed by the Council of Government, governing body, along with a set of other committees to address a number of different regional issues, and sometimes enterprises that are set up. And ABAG set up a set of enterprises, including an insurance pool and a finance authority, as well as a power program. And all of these function under the umbrella of the Council of Government. The Council of Government hires an executive director, and there's a unified staff underneath it, and that executive director is responsible for servicing all of these different functions in this unified way. Of course, there's other deputies, etc. Now, there's variations of this over the years, as you can imagine, in different metropolitan areas, but this is the basic model, and I thought you should see it. Okay, next slide. The Bay Area is very unusual in that we have a bifurcated governance structure for the region. This does not exist anywhere else. This is unique to the Bay Area. We have a metropolitan planning organization that was organized not by the Council of Governments, but by the legislature, by statute. And by statute, they receive the transportation dollars from the state and federal governments. So they are in charge of transportation, and all the money flows through them that normally would fuel the Council of Government. And they hire their own executive director and they have their staff. Now, we as a Council of Government, having been left out of that funding stream, created our own funding stream through membership dues, which is about $2 million a year, plus began initiating a lot of grants for state and federal sources that wanted to have an organization with relationships with all the cities and counties in the Bay Area, and those grants have typically been in the amount of around $26 million a year. That doesn't provide the administrative staff, that's covered by the dues, but it's a robust amount of money that's given back to the cities and counties. Now, for example, we've been doing extremely well with grants. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership right now is working with $100 million of grant money. Just that one unit. A very successful structure that was set up by Abag in a way that would attract that kind of money from the Department of Water Resources and EPA. So our Council of Governments has an executive director, that's me, and then we have a unified staff under my direction, my line authority. When SB 375 came about, to have a more integrated land use and transportation plan, we took that very seriously, so did MTC. We had to change a lot of things. It was not that easy to do, but we did it, and we came together to do Plan Bay Area. However, in the process, MTC somehow decided in 2015 that they no longer wanted to work with their structure. They wanted Plan Bay Area under their exclusive control, and therefore they went with 4210, which eliminated the joint representation, which we said is totally unacceptable. Anyway, we got the 6 months and we got the management partners, consultant to do the work. So the next slide. And unfortunately, when you look at this slide, it's very simplistic. This is option 4. This is the one everyone thinks, and not everyone. This is the one a lot of people think makes the most sense. One governing body that handles all the regional issues, one executive director, and one staff. And we say in our analysis, yeah, that would be the easiest one to manage, except that MTC has a statutory responsibility for transportation, and MTC is not going to just open up the transportation funding to a new governing body unless they know what's in it. And we think that's very reasonable. MTC has spent decades managing hundreds of millions of dollars of projects, billions of dollars of projects that cannot be interrupted midstream. They look at the regional network for transportation. These are the BART system and the bus system and the Trans-Bay, large infrastructure projects like the Trans-Bay Terminal. It's Resolution 3434 laid out a whole system of BART expansion, et cetera, big projects that are midstream. And so having a single commission dealing with that year after year, controlling the money, not opening it up to some sort of formula where every city gets a certain amount, makes sense to us as an important part of regional governance. So MTC, in our view, is not organized incorrectly. What the problem is that that's transportation. There are many other regional issues that need to get addressed. And unfortunately, in this report that management partners did, they did not look seriously at governance options. They just came up with this very simplistic view of how you would do a merger. And this was unacceptable to MTC. So it's not available, in our view, as a realistic option that solves our problem and gets us off of Resolution 42. We have to come up with an option that MTC will vote for. And that's where the negotiations took place between our chair and their chair. Okay, next option. Option 7 is the one that brought consensus. And in this option, and which is far from perfect, you can see that NTC hires an executive director, and they hire the staff, and that's line authority. NTC has line authority over the executive director, line authority over the staff, and ABAG is connected by a dotted line. Now, that dotted line implies that there is no line authority between ABAG and the executive director and the staff, and that is a problem. So there are two mitigating features for that. One is both agencies have committed to sign an MOU to describe better what the future holds for governance as well as what roles and responsibilities are. And number two, and number two, execute a contract for services where NTC will provide the staff to meet ABAG's roles and responsibilities and regional autonomy. But from our perspective, that dotted line represents a serious problem with respect to stability of this model. Nevertheless, it does appear to solve our problem to get on the same page with MTC and move forward and work with that MOU for services, for the MOU to describe the relationship, the statutory responsibilities of ABAG, its autonomy for policymaking, and a contract that describes how the staff will service ABAG. Okay, next slide. In part of option 7 is a commitment to pursue new governance models. Now, we think that's important to happen in a relatively short amount of time from when we transfer the staff to NTC administration. However, as we know, no work has been done on that subject that had any hope of being successful. So what I'm presenting here is just an idea, and that idea says MTC is redlined, it's a red border, because it's protected in its statutory authority to have an 18-member commission that is appointed by a number of different mechanisms in cities and counties, and that process protects ongoing transportation investment, and that should stay as it is. But above that is this new regional governing body that is limited authority because it can't control NTC, but it can look at all the other regional issues that we talk about: land use, environmental, infrastructure financing, sea level rise, climate change. Those kinds of issues that we need to address in the 21st century needs to have an institutional home. And that can't be NTC, because they're a transportation commission. It can't be ABAG if we're not adequately funded. So it needs to be a combination of funding plus policy to form a new governing body. And that new governing body, which would have limited authority because it could not control NTC or their dollars, might share in the planning dollars that are made available through the MPO. And there you would get you would have a executive director hired that would have unified control over the staff. Now, option 7, which we're recommending, has a commitment to examine options by a date certain, or under the words pursue. It's not clearly established. I think it's one of the weaknesses in this option. But what we're saying in terms of our analysis is that only option 7 brings us the consensus with MTC, and that's not done yet. That still requires a vote on the part of the MTC Commission. But through Julie's negotiations with Dave Cortese, the chair of MTC, she has successfully brought a consensus with him and with others that option 7 can be put together in a reasonable way. Can you go back? That will establish a reasonably fair MOU and contract for services that allows the work that we're doing now to continue. It will allow the ABAG board to get staffed by this contract for services. We, of course, have to negotiate that, and we're expecting there to be an extensive negotiation that will take at least 6 to 7 months with experts helping. And that will bridge the time frame for which we have a regional political discussion about what's the right way to organize a governing body. Protecting NTC is a major step in that, because if we don't do it, they just walk away. And in our view, if we can come up, if ABAG and NTC can come together as locally elected officials and determine what's the best way to manage regional issues into the future, whatever legislative changes are needed, the legislature will respond. I should also say that the legislature, and I polled all of them, are not willing to come forward and solve this problem for us. This is a matter for locally elected officials to solve their problem. It's the same pool of locally elected officials put these commissioners in their seats and also put the ABAG board members. They are elected officials from cities and counties. We need to solve our problem. Option 7 brings us forward, protects the staff financing, and allows for a future governing model to be debated at a later date. I'm going to give a much more extensive report at the executive board meeting, more detailed. I did write a staff report, which I think tries to cover some of that about what has to be in those negotiations, but for now, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.